Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. And we're truly spanning the globe again tonight because we have Tercia in South Africa, who is not suffering from load shedding tonight, and she's getting better from her outbreak of COVID. Welcome, Tercia. How the devil are you?
I'm much better than last week. I hope. I still get coughing fits from time to time. I'll just mute myself. Let's see how it goes tonight.
Good. I'm pleased you're getting better. That's a progress in the right direction. And our guest,
I'm getting better.
David Vida. Tell me your name, David.
So my South African name, my Afrikaans name is Dawie Vandenheever, but I sort of changed it when I moved to the US to David Vandenheever.
Ah, right. So you're modifying your name for US consumption.
Exactly.
And
I'm dumbing it down for the people over here.
You don't want to punish your American friends and colleagues with Vandenheever.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad you've dumbed it down for UK consumption too, because I was having difficulty. Vandenheever.
That works. And that's why you will also see it initially, like on my passport, it's 3 different words, my last name.
Oh,
I condense it into 1 word now. It's just Vandenheever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have to say it anymore. I can call you David.
Please do. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Well, the way we start this show, as many of our viewers will know, is we ask our guest to give us some sort of potted history to tell us how they got to be the person they are today. Are you up for that?
I am up for that, definitely.
Great.
Okay, so
go.
Over to me. I was born in Johannesburg, or well, close to Johannesburg in South Africa. I actually had a pretty unremarkable, happy childhood. I grew up Christian, so my father's father, so my grandfather, my father's side, he was actually a pastor in the NG Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church. So grew up as a Christian. Went to church on Sunday school, and read Bible every day. Did Bible study. Then I went to school in Johannesburg, to a private school, boarding school. So I was off to boarding school in high school. And then after high school, moved down to the Western Cape, to Stellenbosch, to go study there. I studied mechatronic engineering, and honestly, there's no good reason for why I decided to study that. It was a brand new degree, actually. So it's a combination of mechanical engineering and electronic engineering. It started in the year I went to study, 2002. I wasn't really, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So engineering, my dad was an engineer. I was good in maths and science at school, so studied engineering. But I've always had a lot of diverse interests. I mean, astronomy, cosmology, stars, all of that. I was super interested in string theory at that stage. So halfway through my degree, I contemplated giving it up and going into theoretical physics. Actually went to go and speak to people, and they said, yeah, I should do it. My dad convinced me to rather just finish my engineering degree, and if I really still want to, I can do a second degree in theoretical physics. But it didn't pan out like that. So in university, I was still sort of a Christian. I still went to church. Less often. So once in a blue moon, would go to church. Towards the end of my bachelor's degree, I just knew I was not ready for the real world out there. Didn't want to, be an adult. So I decided to do a master's degree. There was the option to do master's degree in biomedical engineering. So there was funding for this new program as well. It was 2 years old in biomedical engineering, and I decided, okay, yeah, let's do that. So did master's in biomedical engineering. Towards the end of that, same story. I was super afraid to go out and face the real world. Didn't want to be an adult, and there was an opportunity to do a PhD. in knee replacements. So I decided, okay, yeah, let's do that. And I think during my PhD, that's the first time I actually started to question my faith. Started asking questions. And my dad is actually the first one that he gave me The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and said, read this. And that was a game changer for me. Also during my PhD, that's when I realized I actually really enjoy research. Doing a PhD, it wasn't, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging now, but it wasn't that difficult. It's 3 years. You have one topic to focus on, no courses. It's super flexible. You're on your own time. You just need to figure out this one problem. In 3 years, I actually took 4 years to solve the problem of knee replacements. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of that, same story. I didn't see myself in the real world out there, so I just stayed in academia. Luckily, I've been fortunate in everything just sort of opens up in front of me. There was an opening for a position, a senior lecturer position in my department where I did my PhD, and they kind of asked me, do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. Started doing research in biomedical engineering. And so I mentioned earlier that I've always had a lot of sort of broad interests. So I kept on always reading, about quantum physics, and I've always been interested in the brain as well. Neuroscience. So I've read a lot of popular neuroscience books. And so initially, when I started out as an academic, most of my research was in medical devices type stuff. Mm-hmm. But then I just realized one day I can actually do what I love, the neuroscience, and I've always been interested in that. I can do that as my job. I can start doing research in the brain. And so that's when I switched to calling myself a neural engineer.
Whoa.
That was about in 2017. I started to focus my research in neural engineering. So just switch. That's what's so fun about academia. You can do what you want. You can one day decide I'm going to shift my whole research focus area and do something new.
Yeah. So you finally committed yourself to becoming an adult.
No,
I don't know. I'm still at a university, still doing research, still doing what I want to do. I feel like I'm a full-time student.
So, Dawie, you've given me a tip here. I'm now enrolled to do my master's degree at 50. So I decided at 50 that I'm tired of living in the real world. So I'm going back to studying.
Fantastic. Actually, you know my dad. So when I got my PhD, he was 60 or approaching 60. That's when he decided, I can have my son more qualified than I am. So he did his PhD at the age of 60.
Well, I'm going to try and get my master's at 50. But Dawie, I want to ask you about your the knee replacement stuff. I'll probably be due for one soon because at my age, what was the problem? If it can be done briefly, if it can't, it's fine. Then I'll just arrange a private Afrikaans podcast with you. But I'm keen to know what was your research and what was your finding on knee replacement?
I can. It's not really that complicated. So I work with Spike Erasmus. He's quite a well-known knee surgeon in Cape Town, in Stellenbosch.
Yes. Works on rugby players?
Yes. So if there's a knee injury in rugby players, they go to Spike. And he proposed the project, actually. He said, okay, most knee replacements out there, they come in standard sizes. Like you get a large, medium, a small. And you try to, so you make the patient's bone for the implant instead of the other way around, making the implant for the patient. So basically what my PhD was custom knee replacements. So you take a couple of measurements on the patient and you use, the buzzword these days is artificial intelligence or machine learning. So we use some machine learning to predict the original healthy shape of the patient's knee and then we make custom 3D printed knee replacements. But unfortunately, it was all just sort of theoretical. I never actually commercialized anything. It was a theoretical academic exercise.
So they're still saying you're a big, medium, or small.
Yep, that's still the way they do it.
This brings me. You've now led me to ask another question, because I'm having enrolled now for studies of my own, and having always been interested in what happens in academia and reading academic articles, because I'm a nerd that way. I've come to the conclusion that in almost every field, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think that there is something like the academic ivory tower, that the connection between what happens in academia and what happens in the real world is it varies, obviously, but so I'm in education, and there's almost a complete and total disconnect between what I see happening in classrooms with children in front of me and what I hear is happening in academia and research-wise. And what you're saying, I mean, do you think that's a problem, that we need to have a more of an interconnectedness between what happens in academia, especially in more practical fields, and what happens in the corporate world?
Yes, so you are 100% correct, Asha, and I agree with you. So I think a lot of the times it's also sort of the fault is on us, on the academia. I'm not interested in commercializing anything. I like the intellectual problem and just, doing that. You need, and there are some of them, you need, especially in something like biomedical engineering or engineering, you need academics that has an entrepreneurial mindset as well, that wants to commercialize, that wants to take it further.
Or you need the academic who's not in the real world to partner with somebody who is in the real world. And I think maybe that's where the problem comes in.
Yes, so that's the other option. You see that happen a lot more in Europe, especially where big companies, they work with academia. So BMW would sponsor some of the labs over there, or something like that. A problem in South Africa that I realized was, especially Stellenbosch University, and I'm going to badmouth them now, but there's always the intellectual property debate. Who has the IP? And Stellenbosch was really bad with that. They wanted to keep all the IP, and they sort of, chased industry away from working with us because they believe they own the IP if we did anything. And
well, we have certainly in the UK and probably in lots of parts of Europe, and of course California and Boston, other parts of the world, very often a university which is into serious research, cutting edge research at the frontiers of the unknown, they will have a science park around them, and they will be trying to find applications for their new discoveries.
There's a big drive in the US also now from the National Science Foundation to what they call translational research, to try and see if you can translate what you find in academia into the real world, to actually impact and make a positive impact in the real world out there, and not just have it all in academia. Because just sorry, I just wanted, maybe it's just me, I've always been bad in that. So I've done research for the past, if we include my PhD, I mean, it's coming up to 15 years. And there were many medical device type projects. And I mean, I'll work with a student, we'll do a 2-year master's or a 3-year PhD. And when it's done, the project gathers dust in the cupboard somewhere, and I'll move on to the next one. And, I probably also have a short attention span. You'll probably still see that during this hour.
You get bored easily. I get that. So I think we need to get you a corporate sponsor to take all those projects and put them to good use in people's knees.
So back on the short attention span, after I did my PhD on knees, so I looked at knees for 4 years. I vow to never look at knees again. So I was surprised when you wanted to talk about that. That's a part of my life I'm trying to forget. It's knees and knee replacement.
Okay, so Dawie, I want to. One of the reasons I invited, so this is again actually a South African takeover of the Free Thought Hour, because Dawie was my idea for a guest. I pressed on John that we have to get you, and the reason was, the main reason for this interview is that you just published a book. So my attention span has to be shorter than yours, because I've been working on my book for 4 years now, and I don't know if it'll ever get finished. So you can't have that short an attention span if you've been able to actually publish a book. So tell us a little bit about your book, and also please tell me, how old were you when you first watched or were introduced to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Oh, wow. Okay. So the book is called 42, so that's where the reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy comes in. I don't know. This is I'm going to sound like a millennial now, but when did the movie come out? That was probably my first introduction to the Hitchhiker's
I don't know. I have to Google it.
But so I saw the movie.
Did you read the book at all?
I read the book after that.
Good.
I ultimately got to reading the book.
Because the book is better than the movie.
It always is, right? It always is, yes. So with the idea for the book, it didn't start out that it would definitely be 42. That sort of came afterwards. The idea for the book was more, if I go back to my journey, so during my PhD, that's when I really started questioning my faith, and that's basically when I became an atheist. And when I started reading Richard Dawkins. I mean, Dawkins leads you to Sam Harris and Dennett and Hitchens, and then you just there's a whole new world, especially on YouTube. I just love watching YouTube videos and watching debates between Christian apologetics and
Dawie, can I ask you if you've ever, there was a debate between John Lennox and Richard Dawkins. I think it's about 12 years old. It is one of the all-time most frustrating and most enjoyable conversations. I'll send you the link.
Please do.
It was actually, they had a debate in Alabama.
Okay, yeah.
Both of them were in Alabama. And so I'll send you that link. You will. It's excruciating. I mean, it's so enjoyable to see John Lennox.
Watching these videos, I realized that there's a big proportion or big population in the world that likes to or still wants to turn to one book to find all the answers of how the world started and why humans are here, and then also more philosophical, moral, ethical questions that want to turn to this one book. And so I always thought, man, we should do a Bible 2.0. Someone should just write a new Bible, to satisfy this need for one book. So I always had that idea in my mind and said, okay, so obviously you can do a lot better creation story than, in the beginning, God created blah, blah, blah. You can actually tell the story about the Big Bang. And you don't need Noah's Ark story. You can do evolution. And so I've been toying with the idea for more than 10 years. And then at some stage, I also realized, I read a book. Like I said, many interests, short attention span. So at one stage, about 4 or 5 years ago, I got into philosophy. And I started reading about philosophers, watching YouTube videos on philosophy. And I got this little book, The History of Philosophy. I think it's The History of Philosophy, but it's sort of like a book series. They do a short history of philosophy. They also do a short history of science and a short history of lots of things.
Is the book A Short History of Economics part of that series?
Probably, most probably. So there's the short history series, and
Okay.
They take a philosopher and they do like 5 pages on the philosopher. And so I think they did, let's say, 50 philosophers. And I really enjoy that style where it's sort of really short chapters. They condense a philosopher and his ideas down to a couple of pages. And I enjoyed reading that because you only need to set aside 10 to 15 minutes. You read it and, you can do a chapter. And then you can put the book down and next day, new chapter.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that. And then I decided, okay, so if I'm ever going to write the book, I want to do it in that style. And then I sat down and I started to think about the different chapters I want to write. And I got close to 42, and that's when that idea sparked. I said, okay, man, 42 is, it's become like this cult like answer to the answer to life and the universe and everything. And I said, man, this works perfectly. I just need to find 1 or 2 more chapters and 2 short chapters, make it 42, and that's how all of this happened.
Well, I'm tempted to buy it now. You sold it to me.
Oh, fantastic! You should have bought it a long time ago already, John.
So I'm going to drop some names now because you've been dropping them as well. So, well, I'm going to say that I'm meeting Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss on the 4th of June when I'm organizing an event in London, and they will both be there. I will be presenting an award to Richard Dawkins because, we have the investiture in this country and we give out knighthoods and damehoods and so on, but no atheist is ever going to be awarded anything because, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the monarch of our religion, wouldn't permit it. The king is the head of our religion. So, so how can you get an award as an atheist, eh? So I'm going to present him with an award.
That's fantastic, and I'm incredibly envious of that.
I think that I have just decided that I'm going to launch a GoFundMe so that I can fly to the UK and be there on the 4th of June and have a beer with John. But I'll need to either rob a bank or I'll definitely have to do a GoFundMe because I would so love to be there.
You'd be welcome, but there's only 270 tickets. Well, it's less than that because we're giving some to our celebrities. So let's say 250 tickets. They're not available yet, but when they become available, you'll have to be quick.
Oh, well, Tasha, I'm going to fight you for a ticket.
I will sneak it. I will brush the red carpet. I'll just go if I serve drinks and food or something, and I don't take up a lot of space. John, surely you can make some arrangement for me.
And do you know what's one of the other perks of academia? Is the traveling it enables. So I always joke it's not about about the content of a conference. It's about where the conference is. I'm definitely now going to look for a conference round about June 4th in the UK.
London. Well, let's see what we can get done. Dawie, I want to ask you about so let me first ask about neural engineering.
Yeah,
because when I read about that, when I read your latest bio and I read about that, I was immediately tickled and intrigued because working with children and being an educator, how the brain works has fascinated me, I think, since forever. And I would be so keen to hear what you're working on at the moment. I want to just give some background and just say maybe it will give you an idea of what might be intriguing to some of our audience members as well. So I've just been we launched a new startup business where we actually assist children who do who do online learning, but they can come to our center and they do their online learning, but we help them and we give them feedback and we make sure that they learn how to learn online, because that actually not learn how to learn online, that they learn how to learn independently, because most kids are not taught to do that in school. And one of the things that I do with the children is when they come to our center, they have these horrific handwritings. I mean, and I'm not saying that everybody writes neatly, and handwriting is unique, but I'm convinced, and I've proven it because I've taught kids who came to us writing like it looks like a crab ran over an ink pot and then ran over the page. And I've been able to train them to write more neatly. And what I find is that when they focus on writing more neatly, it's as if something happens in their brain, and they engage in a different way with the learning material that they are working with. And then I started to read a few articles about handwriting and how there's a link between, because it's this hand-eye. So is that the type of thing? Would you do any research similar to that, or am I way off the mark? Sorry.
Okay, Tarsha, that sounds very interesting, and it's definitely something that I would look up, and I mean, it's something that interests me. And so it's not something I do at the moment, but it's something that I could do and would like to look into. Because my research in neural engineering is the same as the rest of my life. It's, short attention span. I do a lot of different stuff. It's all over the place. But in a nutshell, there's sort of two arms to what I do. There's the theoretical side, and that's more just using technology to try and understand the brain and how the brain works. So most of what I do is work with EEG, these electrodes on the scalp, and record electrical brain activity. So I'm trying to understand the brain, and there we tackle smaller questions like do we have free will, and what is consciousness? And then on the other side, because I'm an engineer and I still find myself within an engineering department, they always want me to do something practical as well. There needs to be some application to what I do. So on the application side, there's quite a lot. So with my background in, like I said, medical devices, I still do a bit of diagnostic devices. So at the moment, we're looking at, integrating electrical brain activity with eye movement and balance type things to diagnose. You can diagnose concussions with that, so mild traumatic brain injury. And also now looking at smartphone-based or tablet-based games that we can use to diagnose ADHD, stuff like that.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so interesting.
And when people hear biomedical engineering, the first thing they always think about, and I mean, I've talked to a lot of school children as well that's interested in engineering. They want to know about biomedical engineering. The thing that across the world is the same in South Africa and here. If they hear biomedical engineering, they think about like robotic arms. They want to, if someone is an amputee, a robotic arm or robotic leg. So why not? We do that as well. So we're looking at using again the brain activity to decoding intention in brain activity to control a robotic arm or a wheelchair or something. That's called brain-computer interfacing.
There's quite a few non-intrusive brain-watching technologies now, isn't there?
Yes.
I had an interview a year or two ago on this show with a lovely young lady who's doing some research into how babies think, and she puts a cap on their heads and it uses light to watch the brain, because the skull is transparent to the highly intense light, and there is no physiological harm caused. No babies are hurt in this, in this experiment, but they can study their brain waves that way. So there's fMRI as well. And did you know recently they've managed to get some electrodes into the brain of an octopus?
Oh no, I did not know that.
Yeah, because octopuses are very differently designed, yes. Adapted.
I was going to say, John, really, that's a slap on your wrist for using improper language.
Yeah, but they are very different. They've got little bits of brains in their arms.
Exactly. The nervous system isn't confined to one
Yeah.
spot. It's sort of all
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Mm.
And yes, there's a lot of fancy technology out there at the moment. So the one you were referring to is it's called FNIRS, or functional near infrared spectroscopy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There's fMRI, as you know, and I've been to a lecture very recently. It was a month ago, if that long, about people now using ultrasound. And I mean, the normal ultrasound you use to scan for pregnant ladies.
Yeah.
And I mean, the problem with the brain is the skull, and ultrasound does not work well with bone. But new technique, there's a lot of people, and it's amazing. I recognize there again because the person told the story about how they got to this, and how that's a great thing about science for me is it's always these small incremental steps. If someone did something, and then someone else said, "Oh, that's cool," and build someone else on that, and a couple of years later, and you can use ultrasound to scan brain activity.
Yeah. So what is mechatronics, where you started out? What does that actually mean?
So mechatronics is literally just combining the words mechanic and electronic. So megatronic. So it was literally a brand new degree that started at Stellenbosch University. I was part of the first group. We were 18 in my group that started this degree program in mechatronics. So it's still based within the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So it was I want to say 85% mechanical engineering. And then we just did a couple of electronic engineering courses as well.
So it's more of a combined degree than an actual new field of study.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I want to answer Dean Kruger's question. Dean asks, when are we going to get? How long before we have Wi-Fi connections directly to our brains? I was we already have, because he just asked the question I wanted to ask. So it seems that we already have that. There's an episode of is it Black Mirror? Did you ever watch any of?
Yes,
that?
lots of it.
There's one of the episodes that has stayed with me is where you can get an implant, and then your eye acts like a recorder, and everything that you see is actually recorded in your brain. And the implications didn't end well for the participants, or some of them at least. But that was fascinating, and the idea that you can have these direct interface between your brain and some external device, and the way I understand is that in rudimentary ways we are, for all practical reasons, we are there in some ways. As I said, if you can have an electrode implanted that sends a signal to a mechanical hand, then
yes. I need to start off by saying that I do the non-invasive kind of research. So I use the caps that go on the outside of the skull. And it's super tricky because there's a lot of the signal is lost between the brain and the actual electrode.
Is that because of the bone? Is that because of the skull?
Yes, I mean it's the skull, and even signals that originate from deep inside the brain. There's volume conduction in the brain, so it originates in the middle of the brain, but the signal gets sent out. But what I wanted to say is there are a lot of people doing research in actual implants that implant on the brain.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you know this, but even Elon Musk has a company, Neuralink.
Yes.
I'm familiar with
brain implants. He's actually not at the forefront. There's a lot more companies that's farther ahead than him. There's companies that's already doing human participant experiments. And Elon Musk, for some reason, they're still saying no to him, the FDA over here. So, I mean, the answer is yes, we are not far away. I don't know about a Wi-Fi connection, but controlling stuff with the brain, bypassing your body and controlling things just using the brain, that's already happening. How far we're going to go with this, I don't know. I mean, the problem is the brain is obviously, as we all know, it's super complex. There's 86 billion neurons in the brain, and each neuron makes 1,000 to 10,000 connections to other neurons. I mean, that gives you trillions and trillions of connections. So at the moment, what people do is that implant small electrodes, usually on the motor cortex, so, a step over here somewhere, and people can learn how to control something using that. And you need the feedback of whatever you're reading. So we can learn to control a small bit of the brain. I don't think we're anywhere close to actually doing mind reading or anything like that at this moment.
Yes, it's a case of getting the electrodes closely enough together to get plenty of them at the sort of neuron level of size.
Yes.
And although we can do an artificial eye and connect it to the optic center, it can still only recognize a fuzzy number 8 or something.
Exactly. I mean, so you can imagine if you want to, do real mind reading, you need 86 billion little electrodes that record the activity of each neuron.
Why would anybody want to do mind reading? I mean, really, I just don't. Why would I want to read anybody else's mind? It's difficult enough to read my own mind.
I wonder quickly, on that, so the bit of research we do on free will is, I like to talk about it because I like to shock people.
Go ahead.
That's sort of where we try to do mind reading.
That was mine. I was going to ask John, who's going to pop the question, do we have free will? Because it's in big letters at the top of my notes paper.
I think it's Hitchens that also, it's one of them that said yes, you have free will because you have no choice.
That sounds okay. So yes or no, Dawie? Let's play a game. I'll say what my opinion is, and John, then you say, and then Dawie says. So, yes or no? Do we have free will? My answer is no. John?
Well, this isn't a yes or no question, is it? You can't polarize.
Come on, don't act as if you're Jordan Peterson.
Well, what's wrong with
say yes or no?
Daniel Dennett's view is that we have compatibilism. So, and I don't see anything wrong with having a subconscious predetermination sort of state of affairs, but a conscious overlay on that which can tweak it a bit. And then, of course, what sort of free will are you talking about? There is no such thing as libertarian free will, but in my view, but there are other types of free will.
I agree 100% with John. So it's going to depend on your definition of free will, firstly.
I agree with, I just want to say for clarity, I agree with John, and it's a complex question, but I like to, if I have to be put on the spot and I am told that I have to answer yes or no, do we have free will? Then if you define free will as, do we have a choice in what we do? I will say, if I have to answer a toddler who asks me, I will say, no, we don't. We feel as if we do, but we don't, but it's complicated.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm also a compatibilist. So I believe the world is determined. Ever since the Big Bang, the world is determined. It's, the dominoes falling according to the laws of nature. However, we still have free will in the sense that this is a common theme in my book as well, is that we should remember that a term like free will, it's a human invention. We made up the term. It's not inherent in the universe. No. So free will is what we define it to be. And so my view is the brain is so complex. It fits in nicely with my story about the research we also do. So why a lot of people also don't believe in free will comes it goes back to this experiment by Benjamin Libet in the 80s, actually 1983, exactly 40 years ago.
Uh-huh.
He did this experiment, and we hooked an EEG, people up with an EEG, and he asked them to, whenever they feel like it, a completely free choice, they flex their wrist or push a button.
Mhm.
All they had to do, they watch this clock with a little dot that makes a revolution every 2.5 seconds. And they just had to note where on the clock face this target, this little dot was when they made their decision to move. And long story short, he showed that, he time locked everything to movement, and he showed that about 200 milliseconds before movement, the people made a decision to move. But 350 milliseconds before that, there's brain activity that shows they're going to move.
Yes. Which they weren't aware of.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, that's like I said, 40 years ago, and there's been a lot of criticism and the methodology of the study and how they did it and what they did. So my research is also just, jumping on that bandwagon. It's just fun stuff. So we're sort of repeating Libet's experiments with a couple of differences. We give a choice. We say people should press left or right. So same thing. And whenever you feel like it, press left or press right. And the other problem with Libet's study, they looked at the neural signal they saw. It's called the readiness potential. First in German, it was the Bereitschaft potential. But translated to English, it's the readiness potential, and it's found in the motor cortex. So it's people say it's the brain preparing for movement. It's what they see. So what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, let's look all over the brain, not just motor cortex. If it's a real decision, there's probably somewhere else the decision originates. Then it gets sent to the motor cortex to carry out the action. So we record 128 channels, electrodes all over the brain. And then, again, buzzword machine learning. We try to see if we can use machine learning to predict whether someone's going to press left or right. And then what we do is we have these time windows and the signal, and we see how far before they actually choose, how far in time before they press left or right, can we still accurately predict whether they're going to press left or right. And I mean, spoiler alerts, I mean, we haven't published yet. We're still processing some of the data, but on some people, we can, at the moment, up to 2 seconds before they make their decision, we can predict what they're going to do.
2 seconds, that's a lot, eh?
I mean, yeah.
2 seconds is a lot.
Initially we had 22 participants. If we pooled everyone's data, we do not get good results. But if we do it just individually, on some individuals, it's easier to see than in others. So I like.
Why would that be? Do you know why it is?
Yeah, some people have free will, others don't. That's what we
Variation. Woohoo! I love it.
Some of us are robots. So
Yes.
sorry, John. Just so
We're aliens, not robots. We're aliens. We've been replaced. Some of us are. Those are the aliens. Those are the reptile people walking amongst us.
Yeah.
What I take that to mean is that some of us are leaders and some of us are sheep.
Yeah, John, we should get you in the lab and see which one you are, right?
Oh, I think I know what I am.
but
Well, I was wondering. Just this is a bit of a side topic, but how do you get the participants? How do you choose them? Are they mostly students? You just put an ad out. How do you get these people who come as lab rats?
yes, there's in the neurosciences, there's called what they call the weird population. So it's westernized, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic.
Yep.
Right? 90% of all neuroscience findings is on the weird population. It's actually a very small population, and that's because it's students. You just get your university students to be your test subjects.
Yeah.
So I advertise to my classes. We have flyers up on the walls, and we get people like that. But mostly it's word of mouth. Some students will tell their friends.
Do they get paid?
Yeah. But you haven't got a decent sample size or sample population across the population.
Yes.
I just want to come back to the whole thing of free will. I think that when most people talk about free will, and I think that's also why I say no, we don't have free will, because most people that I know say that, yeah, let's fly him out, eh? Let's do that. When most people talk about free will, they talk about free will in the context of Western Christianity, because that is where the topic of free will mostly, in most conversations that I've had with people, it's if you can choose whether you want, if you don't believe in God, then it's because you've made the wrong choice. And it's also within the context of predetermination. I mean, I grew up in the gereformeerde kerk, the Reformed Church, and there is the dogma is that you can't choose whether you believe in God or not. God chooses you, and you were chosen before the universe was created. So, my first thoughts about free will and the concept of free will was, and that actually led to was one of the things that led to my deconversion, because I grew up in a church that said that you can't choose whether you want to believe in God or not, because God chooses you, and God is almighty. So if God didn't choose to give you the gift of faith, then you can't do it out of your own accord, which is a direct negation of the concept of free will. But then when I started to have discussions with people, but how can that be? Then I was told, no, you actually do, because God chooses to choose you, and then you can choose not to choose. And I just said, what the hell? It's in that case, it's easier to go with, we obviously don't have free will, because
Well, first show me your God. then I can understand. Then I can consider whether or not he can choose me or you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I when I talked about free will, which is, it's a very interesting topic in within the doctrine of Christianity. It's a very interesting topic, because when you talk about what do you believe, and can you choose what you believe, can you choose not to believe in God or not, then you're actually talking about at least an aspect of free will. And I just think that, based on what I've learned by listening to people like Professor Mark Solms of UCT, I don't know if you're familiar with his work about dreams and consciousness, Dawie. You must be familiar with him.
Yeah. So
you
I'll
probably
elaborate
know
now.
him. You probably had coffee with him. I mean, so I just interviewed him on this show. But
Okay.
I mean, and then Robert Sapolsky. If you look at all the factors that we have no control over, and that we are often not aware of, that influences how we make decisions. If you look at biochemistry, if you look at blood sugar levels, if you look at something like hormones, hormonal fluctuations, if I look at all those factors that influence what I do and when I do it and how I do it, then I think we have a very limited free will. And I think it varies from person to person. The stronger one's metacognition is, this the stronger one's I don't know, one can learn to control certain biochemical, I don't know, am I making any sense here?
Yes, you are making sense, and I get what you're saying, and I to a degree, to an extent, I agree with you. But here's the other thing again. Like I said, the theme in my book as well is a lot of these terms are man-made terms. It's not inherent in nature. So even the concept of I, if you say whether I'm in control of my life, what's the I? I mean, the idea of a single I, person, that's also a construction of the brain.
Of the brain, yep.
I am my brain. That includes my subconscious. The choice is my subconscious, Mark. I identify with that as well. So a lot of people only identify with the conscious parts. you talked about Mark Solms now, and I mentioned I also do some research in understanding consciousness, and I'm actually working with him. So we supervise a PhD student together in consciousness type research we do. So I know Mark well. So the problem is, what's the I? Where does that I sits, and how do we define the I if we want to say I have free will? Are we just talking about the conscious part or not? Do we include your subconscious? And
okay, so when are you doing a project with Robert Sapolsky?
That I don't know yet.
Come on, get off your ass, get into the real world and do some work, Dawie.
You see, I'm still a little scared of the real world. However, I mean, I'm in the US now, and what I find very, very interesting in the US is the political system and political atmosphere here, and this whole, polarized environment we live in. And I'm super amped to start doing some research in looking at the brains and decision making between these, two extremes. Your far left and far right, and so
are you familiar with the research? And I don't know where I read or heard this, probably on SGU, the research that was done where it was at some university, also a bunch of students, but they were specifically selected to be from more liberal parts of the States. And so it was some university, and there were students from the southern parts and then from the more liberal northern parts traditionally. And what they found was that, so the experiment involved the students being called into an office, and there was a narrow passageway, and then there was quite a physically big guy that was, he either carries papers and then he sort of doesn't make way, and they test so the actual experiment is to test the students' reaction. How do they respond to this rude, because he's quite rude, and then he's actually not making way, and then the papers fall, and then he swears or gets quite nasty to some of the students. And what they found was that all of the students that came from the southern states were much faster to react aggressively, whereas all the students from the northern states were much more inclined to say sorry and just diffuse the situation, whereas the southern people were more inclined to go into violent angry reactions. And the conclusion that they came to is that the forebears of the people from the south are mostly from Scotland and Ireland, and the people of especially the Scottish ancestry, they were livestock farmers, and they were very clan bound, and they were focused on protecting a piece of land where my flock is grazing here, and this is our clan. And there was a very strong clan bond. And what they propose is that, so now so there's an evolutionary inclination that is almost bred into the people.
Yeah.
You follow me? Whereas the people of the north, they were more industrial and more, if they were farmers, they were more grain, they farmed with grain, so they had a more cooperative type of system. And they made the connection as well in later research between the Arab tribes, that there's such a strong inclination for violent reactions, and this whole idea of if you slight my daughter, then I have to do an honor killing to avenge my child or my son or my brother or my cousin even. And they actually made a genetic link between those types of responses. So I mean, if you talk about free will, how you respond in a situation is even determined possibly by your genetic ancestry.
It definitely is. I mean, it's determined. Like I said, it goes all the way back to the Big Bang, probably.
And well, that's what Robert Sapolsky says.
But I have to defend the South now quickly here, the South of the U.S. So I'm in the heart of the South. I'm in Mississippi, in the Bible Belt, and they are the friendliest, nicest people you'll ever meet. They are all, I mean, they're incredibly friendly, incredibly nice. It's really like in the movies. The neighbors bring you food, and my
Just,
one
just
neighbor
don't,
gives me fresh chicken eggs every morning. They are
just don't
extremely.
bump one of them. Don't piss them off.
I think that's maybe the thing. Maybe I've just never pissed anyone off yet. So
Don't piss.
they
Because
should probably just not watch this. I might piss them off.
because Dawie, I mean, both of you and I are both from South Africa. Afrikaners are like that. I mean, Afrikaners are extremely gregarious. We are very sociable, but don't piss us off, because then we get very dangerous.
I'm not like that, Trisha.
Well, we're playing between the tribalism and the explorer mentality here, aren't we? Because those people who didn't get in the sailing ships and go and discover new lands were more open-minded than those people who stayed at home and looked after their plot. And that could be the start of this sort of difference in attitude towards outsiders. But I wanted to say about how I take your point that it goes right back to the Big Bang, because I like to think, because free will is closely tied up with morality, isn't it?
Yes.
And I like to think that there's two layers to this. I like to think that we have evolved what you might call in computing terms a BIOS. We have evolved an adaptive tendency to be social animals, which needs us to be empathic towards the needs of others because we want their cooperation. So if you do the normal curve, you'll find that most of us are nice to each other. But of course, variation means that there's going to be some outliers who are more selfish or whatever the opposite end of that spectrum would be. But then on top of that BIOS, we've got a conscious mind that we can twist the knobs with. So, for example, you gave us an experiment. You described an experiment in which your subjects were presented with something and had to respond with pressing a button or whatever. And this brings me to the point that everything is contingent. The conveyor belt of time is always going past. It's a procession of changes. And so every incident has been previously experienced by our remote ancestors. So we've been programmed about the appropriate way to respond to it. But because every incident is individual and will never happen again, because the conveyor belt of time doesn't stop, this means that we can consider, with our conscious mind, we can consider whether our automatic reaction is appropriate or not. So, for example, whereas we may be programmed not to kill, if we see a man with a gun threatening a vulnerable child, it's okay to kill that man to save the vulnerable child. And if we see somebody who's dying and in agony, we can do a mercy killing. So although we've been programmed with what you might call the commandments, everything is actually dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
I agree 100%. So there's a lot I can unpack there, but let's focus on sort of the morality part. Obviously, there's no such thing as objective moral rules. I mean, nature is completely indifferent to these words we make up and what we do. But John, as you said, yes, we due to our history and evolution, we evolved to be social animals, and the best strategy for social animals to flourish is to cooperate, and you should be able to trust each other. And so sort of that is morality. Morality is the code of conduct or the rules that we all agree to abide by, so that as a collective we can flourish.
Yes.
But it's some of it is sort of ingrained in the brain. I mean,
Yes.
through years of conditioning,
Mhm.
you get a sort of like a disgust reaction to something because it's been conditioned. But
Mm.
as you said, with our conscious mind, we can sometimes overrule that, and because our natural instinct is not always right. And the best example for this is, I mean, a short 10,000 years ago, when there were different human tribes, your first reaction if you see someone from a different tribe was probably, he might be an enemy. I need, outsiders bad, insiders good. So
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
attack. And I mean, that obviously that can lead to racism. If someone looks different. Now we know that, okay, so the brain is not that smart. That in our new global world, that's not a good thing. And so we should override it. We should
Yes.
change our sort of, if you want to call it a moral compass. Everyone says, the not everyone, but a lot of Christians, especially, but probably a lot of theists like to say, evidence for God is the purpose. We know, but a lot of it's evolution, and a lot of it's just common sense, man. I mean, we want to build a society where we can all flourish, and for that we need some rules. And basically, that's morality. That's our moral code.
Yeah.
But it's something that we've agreed about. It works best in a democratic country where you can form a consensus of opinion. Doesn't work so well in a dictatorship. Yeah.
And
so
it also works best when I think when we apply the veil of ignorance, when the people that make the rules don't necessarily know where they'll fit in the roles, what role they'll fulfill in that society. But John, we can't break our rule, can we? You've made the rule, and it will be completely immoral
I am
for
God.
us to
Yes. So
we obey your rules.
Can you give us a bit of an intro? Because next week we think we've got Ariana Jasmine, who wasn't able to.
She has sent me a message. She's very excited and keen to come onto our program. Ariana Jasmine is a Iranian-born American activist. She's very prominent on Twitch and TikTok. She's currently very busy hosting and arranging protest action against what's happening in Iran. She has a very large international following, and I listened to 2 interviews with her on David Smalley's podcast, and she said something that really struck a chord with me, and that is that in the case of what's happening in Iran, the kind of communication and social media activism that she does has led to people who were actually going to be executed not being executed because their faces and their names were posted worldwide on social media, and that caused the Iranian government to reconsider their actions, at least in connection to certain individuals. And that makes it worthwhile to have a chat to her. She's also very young and very attractive, and it might just change our viewership a little bit, because we are mostly middle-aged and older, so we'd like to get a younger audience. So maybe getting Ariana on here. So there, I've made it all public now. That's our motive. We want to grow our channel because we want to spread free thought, and we want to make everybody think and ask curious questions, because I believe that asking curious questions and having conversations is what makes communities flourish, and that's what we need. So I'm 90% sure that we'll have Ariana. I'll confirm by Monday when I have her bio. So that's my closing statement.
So come and watch us again next week when we have another interesting guest, possibly Ariana. David, thank you very much. You've been wonderful. Tercia, thank you for your help. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I've put up some of your comments during the show. And this is the outro. Say bye-bye, everyone. you.